guys, today I am coming to you with a book review. This is a book that I recently read while I was on holiday and I can't stop thinking about it, so I thought I would give it a quick review. And it's called Enchanted by Rene Denfeld. I first heard about this book on Suddenly Lorna's channel. She talked about it in a June wrap-up, I think. I'll link the video down below if I can find it. So I knew I had to get it and I decided to take it on holiday. I don't know why, because it's a bit of a depressing read for going on holiday, but I just sped through it. I loved it. I didn't really know how I was going to get around to doing this review. On the one hand, it's a book that I really want to talk about and share my opinion with, but at the same time it's a book that I feel like it's really hard to explain, and if I just sort of say the basic plot to you, it really undersells it. The story is narrated by a prisoner on death row. There's several other characters that it focuses on, but the main protagonist is the narrator. The reader is never told what his name is or what he is on death row for. There are several characters, good and bad. You get a few of the prisoners' sort of backgrounds, as well as a couple of other characters. For example, a lady. She's never named, she's just known as the lady. And she is a death penalty investigator, and she is hired to look into another inmate in the same prison that the narrator's in, called York, and see if he can be found not innocent but sort of get him off death row. What I quite liked about the fact that we didn't know the names or the crimes of these prisoners was that I sort of felt compassion for them, whereas had you known the true extent of their horrific crimes, you wouldn't have felt any sort of sympathy towards them. There are three primary characters with a few more kind of thrown in, but each character's story is sort of interwoven with the other one, and it asks questions like, is it your past and is it the life that you had make the man, or is it your choices? And that's one of the good quotes on the back, is how do we stop men like me from happening? The lady's background is also shared with the reader, so that background kind of informs her ability to relate to her clients, and you see that not everything's sort of black and white. Characters like the prisoners aren't all bad, and then you get sort of characters like there's a priest in it and he's not all good. The book didn't necessarily push a message that you might expect it to about a book sort of surrounding death row. It didn't sort of question that people deserve to die for their crimes or not. Well, that's certainly not what I took from it. It's less a book about actual death row and more about the monsters inside death row. It's sort of saying even monsters have stories, even prisoners have stories. It isn't all black and white. The story is one of humanity. It's of crime and punishment and forgiveness and guilt. It also reveals a sort of darkness in the whole prison structure as well, I found. It reveals the sort of corruption that goes on in the prisons. The corruption, the cruelty, and also the loss of hope. One character gets introduced sort of halfway through. What happens to him is very sort of, it starts off quite optimistic and it very soon takes a dark turn, and the whole book sort of illustrates that loss of hope in the prison sort of setting. As well as the metaphorical themes, there is also sort of physical detail explaining things like the meals, why they need to serve it on a particular sort of material, sort of the mechanics of death row. And the author herself is a death investigator. What is it called? A death penalty investigator. So I thought it was probably quite true, and it was really interesting sort of learning about death row like that. What most interestingly, it shows how the deaths are sort of conducted, and I mean it might have been exaggerated for this work of fiction, I'm sure it probably is, but you can't help but feel that there is an element of truth to it, and it was really interesting to read. The prison is underground, so it's very dark and devoid of colour. However, the narrator calls it the Enchanted place, and the prisoners are all sort of under the spell of death, which sounds really sort of depressing, but it's also written so magically. It is a very surreal book at times. The use of magical realism in this book is sort of peppered throughout, and it shows how the narrator has constructed this fantastical appreciation for the world that he inhabits. Through this magical realism, he sort of brings a sort of lightness to his bleak, dark cell and his bleak, dark situation. Magical realism would normally be used as a device to lessen the horror of the book. And it's not a gory book, and it's not a madly violent book, but it is very dark and it is very cruel. I think that's a right way of saying it, is cruel. And magical realism would normally sort of be used to combat that, but here it sort of flourishes it and it almost intensifies the horror, and by not sort of explicitly stating what's happening, it just sort of leaves it up to the reader's imagination, which is often worse than explicitly stating something, which I thought worked really well. The prose is written very lyrically and it's dark, but it also reads almost like a fairy tale. It left me feeling sort of haunted, and it's a sort of weird word to throw around, but it really did. And it's just, I was amazed at how beautifully the author blended this sort of simultaneously beautiful and ugly story at the same time. The book is much more character driven. There is some plot in there, but it is a lot of sort of character driven stuff. Because the characters remain unnamed, you get to focus on their humanity, which is a really good way of doing it. And it asks you lots of different questions, and you end up sort of thinking about the politics of death row, as well as thinking about the character situations, the good ones and the bad ones. It's definitely not a book for everybody. If you don't like magical realism and metaphors hinted at and never really fully explained, then you probably won't like this book. It's not a sort of thriller or, you know, anything like Gone Girl or anything like that, which is a great book in itself, but it's not a sort of mystery, you know, thriller novel that keeps you turning the pages. It keeps you turning the pages for a completely different reason. I think it's definitely one that I will reread in the future and try to get a different message of, maybe when I'm a bit older and sort of have different ideas and different views on different situations. I'm going to lend it to my mum because she is really interested in reading it and see what she thinks. Yeah, it's a really, really great book. I definitely recommend it if you haven't heard of it. The language used in this book is phenomenal. It's so beautiful. The characters in it, for all that they've done terrible things, they are so sort of not relatable, but sort of you empathise with them and you see their situation not as prisoners but as people, and I thought the author just did a really great job. So that's it for my review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I apologise if it's a little bit sort of like everywhere, but the book's sort of everywhere and it's really hard to sort of explain without going into spoilers and without going into sort of specific things about why I liked it. If you are sort of confused by my review, then go on Goodreads and stuff and look it out for yourself, or just read the book. You could just do that as well. Thank you very much for watching. I have quite a few reviews coming up because I've been reading a lot, which is great. It's great to be able to say that. So yes, look out for those. I also have a few other videos planned, so I am definitely getting back into the swing of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.